than an easy poem to read. So it goes like this. There is no warning rattle at the door, nor heavy feet to stomp the foyer boards. Safe in the dark prison, I know that light slides over the fingered work of a toothless woman in Pakistan. Happy prints of an invisible time are illumined. My mouth agape rejects the solid air and lungs hold. The invader takes direction and seeps through the plaster walls. It is at my chamber, entering the keyhole, pushing through the padding of the door. I cannot scream. A bone of fear clogs my throat. It is upon me. It is sunrise. With hope, its arrogant rider. My mind, formerly quiescent in its snug encasement, is strained to look upon their rapturous visages, to let them enter even into me. I am forced outside myself to mount the light and ride joined with hope. Through all the bright hours, I cling to expectation until darkness comes to reclaim me as its own. Hope fades. Day is gone into its irredeemable place, and I am thrown back into the familiar bonds of disconsolation. Gloom crawls around, lapping lasciviously between my toes, at my ankles, and it sucks the strands of my hair. It forgives my heady fling with hope. I am joined again into its greedy arms. And in some ways, it sounds like a tough poem, right? A pessimistic poem. The line that struck me the most was the familiar bonds of disconsolation. And I felt that this week. This week is an interesting week for my family, but this week every year is, but especially this year. 20 years ago, my sister and her husband got into a car with their 5 kids to drive to my other sister's house for Thanksgiving dinner. And as soon as they got onto a highway, they were hit by a semi truck, and both mom and dad were killed. And so it kind of shades this time of year, especially for my nieces and nephews. They ranged from 7 months old to the 14-year-old, and all left orphaned. The 2 oldest, 13-year-old Kirsten and 14-year-old Elise, who are now in their 30s, both wrote this week about that time and about the challenge of carrying that forward. And you can imagine the types of stories, words that they used. But both of their writings had to do with, what have I learned in the 20 years since that blackness, that difficulty, that shadow fell on top of us. And both of their writings had this sense of hope in the midst of what could not be repaired or redeemed completely, but a sense of something beyond. Now, I mention that not because my story is so unique, but more because every one of us have something similar to that story, don't we? All of us have these things that have invaded our lives and left us in that space, as in this poem, where darkness feels like the most comfortable part of the day. And even though morning comes by every time, we still have to sit sometimes in that space of darkness and just pray that the hope is still true. So if you would, I'd love if you'd share at least one of those moments of your own darkness, one of those moments where you've had to hope for hope, right? Where is it that you've struggled in a place like that? And I, just so you know, I love that in there they talk about shadows in the writings. They talk about shadows more than darkness. So forgive me every time I say darkness, because we've kind of trained ourselves to put those two at odds, light and darkness. But I think it's more shadows. And I like that term just because shadows are only caused because light's somewhere in the background still, right? And so we sit in those spaces that appear dark, but we have to find around them the light. So where is it that life has cast shadows on you?
I like the difference I just said, Jen, between darkness and shadows, because shadows to me says it's a passing thing,
Mm-hmm.
that the wind will come or the sun will come out, and stronger, or if you, it's never stronger, it's always the same strength, but it burns away the clouds and burns away that shadow that comes. And I guess I experienced it, thinking about most recently, very personally, was when my dog Teddy died.
Mm.
And I have a friend whose dog is dying right now.
Yes.
And it's very difficult. It brings up a lot of the memories of Teddy's passing from last year. And it feels like the end of the world, my world,
Right.
personally.
But
And then it passes.
But what an amazing position you are able to hold with your friend, because if anybody understands and can be with her in the midst of that, you can, because of what you've gone through.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Thank you so very much. How about the rest of you? When have the shadows swept over? One of the things I like about this story is about this poem is it acknowledges the ongoing cycle of the shadow and light that happens. That as the day goes to night and night to day, it continues to go that way. And we want to think we want it to just be light, don't we? But the reality is that it's not just that. Reality is other things are also present. Not always in unexpected ways. In order to get to the glory of the new child in your arms, you have to go through the pain of childbirth, right? So what have been some of those challenging times for you?
One of mine certainly was when I was in England and found out over the phone that my daughter was addicted to cocaine.
Mm.
And I had no way of getting home because in the process, she'd used the money that I had set aside. And all I could do was walk. And on my walk, I found 4 or 5 other people whose stories were also in shadow at the same time, but for different reasons. Actually, it was at the same time when that airplane in Scotland blew up.
Lockerbie, yeah.
It was that same weekend. And so people all over the UK were grieving and wondering about that as I was grieving and wondering.
Yeah, yeah.
So it felt a great shadow at the time. The thing about living this long is that I can look back and see where the clouds broke.
Yeah, yeah.
And where it got sunny again, and when I didn't expect it to. So perspective is good.
Perspective is good. And larger perspective helps a lot. Experience. Sometimes very hard-earned experience.
Yeah, I read somewhere yesterday that someone was considered wise because of their age, and she said, no, it's just experience. It's not wisdom. It's just having lived through a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you for also bringing up, kind of like with Elizabeth, that companionship on the journey. But it's kind of interesting. that you said, that you mentioned, that they're not going through the same things as me, but what they're going through gives them some kind of sense of being able to be with me. So, sometimes we think you don't know what I'm feeling. Well, that's true, but I can still walk with you. I can still be present for you. The difficulty, of course, is whenever we try to make our experience, our answer, be their answer in the moment. That's where we use our experience incorrectly.
Well, and part of the learning for me was that I was away from my tribe, who I ordinarily would have turned to for comfort.
Yeah.
And so I found it from people who were relatively new in my life that really didn't know me all that well. And I didn't know them until then. And it was a very bonding sort of
Yeah.
situation.
But what a marvelous thing to know that you have more resources than what you thought you had. Right? That you thought the resources were only in certain people. But here's people.
That love comes from wherever I allow it to come from.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
It's not just located in one body or several bodies, but it's there for me if I just am awake to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope everyone's seen is that those shadows come in a number of different ways. The death of a pet is a challenging thing. Very different from an addiction of a daughter. All of them, though, carry their own clouds, right? And we can't judge mine as darker than yours, or we can. It's just not helpful to do that. Here's the thing that you're going through, and how do we sit in the midst of that? How do we somehow shine that what appears to be a very small candle of hope in the midst of that?
Well, and I think if we use the definition of sin as missing the mark, that comparative thing of I hurt worse than you do is close to sinful.
That's exactly right. It's one of those things where in that moment, that's just, and it's not always necessarily that the person is trying to be unhelpful. My mom, for her, in the midst of losing her daughter, had to say that God must have needed her line, which doesn't help me at all. Right? But for whatever reason, that gave a bit of a flicker for her, something to hold on to that allowed her to take that next step. And for me to criticize or to theologize differently and say, no, Mom, it's this way, I might be right. I'm just not helpful in the moment. How about the rest of you? What are the shadows that have kind of hid the light of hope?
Well, for me, it was when I think one of the biggest crises in my life was when my son was 7, and I ended up going through a divorce, or at that time, separation. My ex moved out, and I had to explain to my son just before Thanksgiving that we were going to get a divorce. And he just, when I told him, it was like I stuck a pin in a balloon. I could literally watch this child deflate before my eyes. And it was the hardest thing I ever did. And, but we had so many, it's like friends of ours enveloped us. Like I had a friend who lived in in a big, a lot of property out in Marana. And we would go out there and build big bonfires
Mm,
because they were clearing brush. And so I was able to I was able to just build these big fires to get, quite honestly, I was throwing my ex in there and a couple other people, but you know, in my
which you
mind,
sometimes have to do.
but it helped me get through it. And just the people the really close, especially women friends who came around me, and other families and stuff who came around Wade and I at that time. And it enfolded us in their grace and their love and their kindness. You know, it was just, and we had Thanksgiving we had a wonderful Thanksgiving with friends and stuff. And that divorce is still one of the seminal points of my son's life, I think. It really did affect him greatly. He's now 36 and has kids of his own. But I'm hoping that we've talked about it some, and I said, I'm hoping that by having these other people come around and envelop us the way they did, that it helped a little bit in his journey. But it was a tough time.
You know, the difficulty with divorce, kind of like something like mental illness, is they are more non-casserole diseases, right? Like
Nobody,
if you have cancer, people rally around you. If your husband dies, people rally around you. With divorce, people are more in that space of, I don't know how to help you, right? And so they send up their own problems, and us trying to figure out how to be in the midst of depression, be in the midst of separation is a whole different ballgame, isn't it? Thank you for sharing that. I think one of the things we call out is in the midst of those things, when we are present with each other, one of the things we do is the song that is one of the songs that is part of this is the song, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. And that emerges out of a time where the answer is not there. It's the somewhere it can come. And when we sit beside each other, like you said, those ladies sat with you, Judy, and were there somehow present for you, not because they give the answer right there. They just kind of are calling that word come. Isn't that a great word? It's one of my favorite theological words, that sense of arriving, coming, that we can't quite say it's here, but we know that we're announcing the imminent arrival of, right? Maybe next year, maybe 10 years from now, but that it's coming, right? And what a great thing to be beside someone and just be able to say that. Catherine, you look like you have something to say.
Wow, you must be a mind reader. That's a little scary. But actually, I'm glad to be here. I was having issues getting on for some reason. I think it's because there was the Tuesday morning and now the Wednesday. Anyway, I'm thinking about a time when I had a miscarriage, and it was in the autumn. It was in October. It was actually around my brother-in-law's birthday, which is kind of weird. That's how I always remember it. And it sort of took me by surprise because I was pregnant and I was happy and excited. And then basically the fetus stopped growing. And so I had to actually have a procedure because it didn't spontaneously leave my body. But I poignantly felt when it was alive, and I knew when it wasn't anymore. And it made me feel defective.
Mhm.
And this was at a time, I just noticed that Meghan Markle mentioned having a miscarriage this summer. And of course, Chrissy Teigen, and these people have had a child. This was my first pregnancy. And back in 1969, there wasn't the support stuff like the people can talk about now. I think I internalized it because who do you tell? I mean, my family knew, but it wasn't like now. And I grieved that. And I think I felt hopeless, and I felt a lot of different things. And I think my husband I think he probably had feelings too, but it was strange. It was a very strange experience.
Meghan Markle was actually on TV this morning talking about that experience.
And wrote about it in the New York Times too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what and
Right.
she talks about holding her first child while she feels the pang of that second child.
Yeah, and
Right.
people don't realize that it is a loss. And now, I mean, they have cards for when you lose your pets and things, but and not to denigrate that, because we've all lost pets, and that's always sadder. But there's always so much emotion around a pregnancy and the hopes and dreams that all parents to be have for that child. And
Yeah.
it took me a long time to think about it. And I ended up being able to process it many years later in the form of an experience that I had when I went for like a, what would you call it? A checkup, like for, workman's comp.
Mhm.
And I encountered a very unusual doctor who said, "You have a being with you." And I said, "Oh." So I knew right away who it was, and it was very comforting. And I wanted to keep that little being around me. And then I realized that if that soul stayed with me for so many years, I needed to release it and let it lovingly go.
Nice.
It was a very different, the whole thing is really start to finish is quite different.
Catherine, I don't think you were here yet when I told the story about my nieces and nephews. My sister was killed 20 years ago this year in a car, along with her husband. Her husband lingered a little bit, and I didn't finish telling this story. Elise, the oldest daughter, went into her father in the hospital. He's basically unconscious there. Clinging to life, but really not there. And she reads to him a story that he had read to them. Sing a song is what it is. It's the song by Billy Joel called Lullaby. Good night, my angel. Time to say good night. And he gave that to them with the words essentially that no matter what happens wherever, remember, I'm always here with you. Right? And so she sang that back to him, saying the same thing to him. Go ahead and go. Time to say goodbye. Go ahead and go.
Powerful.
Right? And it's that sense of being able to let go that we sometimes announce to each other, don't we? That it's okay, that there's something that I don't have to cling to.
Well, and it's so weird to think of something, an entity being with me for so long. And there's certain experiences that I've had in my life that I think have profoundly affected me and changed me and let me know that there are things that I do not understand as of yet, and that's okay. But comforting, just the comfortingness of it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But trying
Thank
to
you for
figure out how to,
sharing.
yeah, but trying to figure out how to speak that to each other. For example, Judy, when you spoke to your son at 7 years old, how's he going to understand this divorce? How's he going to process this? And he is going to deflate, like you said. That's absolutely normal and expected. The question is how do you continue to speak those words of hope that allow him to keep taking the next step? How do you sit in that space with him and help him to know he's not alone as he tries to do that?
Well, it was difficult too because I couldn't break apart.
Right?
It wasn't an option for me
Mm-hmm.
because I had to be strong for him.
Yeah.
So it was like I swam laps. I started swimming a mile a day to help me get through it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the water, you can thrash about all you want and cry and scream, and nobody hears, nobody knows. You know, you can get out an awful lot of pain swimming laps. And but yeah, it was so. You know, it was just an intense time for he and I, but it was a time of a lot of closeness too.
Yeah. I sat with a 7-year-old about 10 days ago, and with her older brother, my niece and nephew, whose parents are splitting. And I just sat with them to kind of just say, you're not alone. Remember some of these other things that are true. Remember that you have aunts and uncles and grandmas that care for you. And they're trying to process something which very mature minds can't process easily. And much of what I tried to say was what you tried to say. Be with them. Tell them that there's something more.
The thing, yeah,
Go ahead.
the thing that I think about when I'm listening to that story, the stories, and when, you know, kids have to deal with divorce and things, is as adults, if you can process it again or talk about it in the now and say, do you feel unfinished with something? Is there a question you have, or is there, what would bring peace now to you in this moment regarding what happened then? What could you do that would bring closure?
And I like, Catherine, that you bring up what questions you have, because I think sometimes the questions that come up, we're too good at either answering them quickly to give us the simple answer I want to have, or not acknowledging them at all, right? When my sister died, one of the ways I process death is I write music. I write a song, I write a poem, and I could not with her.
Mm-hmm.
It took a long time. 6 months later, it came out, and it was a series of questions, you know, just ongoing. I can't answer these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a bad place to be in, but we can easily not allow the questions to have a voice because of their difficulty. And when we give permission to the other person to essentially voice what is going to be hard for them to say and hard for us to hear, that's not a bad thing. Go ahead, John.
Well, I'd like to tell of an instance where Diane and I got to experience the most remarkable coming on of light right as the darkest part was over us. We had a grandson, dear grandson, who at age 14 died. And his mother called us right away that day, and we got in a plane and went up to Tacoma, as a matter of fact, which is where he was lying on life support. And both families, us and Karen, that's our daughter, she was the mother of the child, she was divorced, but her ex-husband was there, and all his brothers and sisters and his parents, I think both Otto and Mary were there, weren't they? Everybody was there, both families, and there was no animosity at all, though it had been a kind of a difficult divorce. And here was our little guy on the table, there on life support. We all knew that he had really passed away. His soul was gone, and it was just that machine that was operating. But our daughter wanted to wait before making a decision as to whether he could be contributed, I'll use that word, for medical purposes. And the doctors were way in the background. They weren't present, but they were waiting for her decision and word on that. And we gathered around him. His name is Pele, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And held hands. There were these two families all around him. And his two sisters, as well as his mother, were right there with him too. And our old priest, he wasn't all that old, he was our age, had driven down from one of the islands up north of Seattle, up in the San Juan de Fuca, all the way down to Tacoma to be there with us. And with Karen particularly and the family. Anyway, so here we were gathered, and Karen's decision was then to remove the life support. But before that, much to our amazement, Pele's younger sister, Sophia, she started singing Dancing Cheek to Cheek. Yeah.
And Karen had climbed in bed with Pele.
Mm,
So when the life support was removed, actually both she and Kelsey or Sophie were in bed with him, around him.
nice.
So when the life support was removed, they were bodily surrounding him, touching him.
Yeah.
And
But what a great thing for us to remember to do, because all of these types of things we've been talking about, whatever it happens to be that's the challenge, are times where we could feel completely alone, couldn't we?
Yeah.
They are isolating types of events. And yet what helps is whenever we remember that we're not that way.
Yeah.
I remember so vividly walking into my sister and brother-in-law's house. They lived in the Dallas, Texas area. And they'd only lived there like 6 months. So they didn't have community there, but you wouldn't know it by the number of things that had been brought over to their house in donation to the family. That community that didn't know my sister and brother-in-law, they surrounded them and made sure they knew that they were not alone. And I think that sense of taking ourselves, helping each other to not be in isolation in those moments is the candle of light, right? That which somehow shines something different.
Well, there's a little bit more to this too. I want to be sure to tell that
Good.
it's turning on the light, as I said, when Sophia started singing, dancing cheek to cheek, and she put her cheek down next to Pele's. The girls, both of the girls they had surrounded him with these little plastic flowers and so forth. It was really beautiful. But that priest, our dear friend who had driven all the way down to be there, he asked if they wanted to be baptized. Neither of the girls nor Pele had been baptized yet. And the girls said yes. So we all looked around, and there was one of those cheap bronzy looking pots with plastic flowers in it there in the room. Well, out went the plastic flowers. The water was dumped out of that pot, and Father Sandy just got some water in it and blessed it, and then baptized both the girls and Kelly.
What a marvelous thing to do in the midst of loss.
There was such, and what really struck me, the light part was the joy that I felt at that time. There was actually joy.
Mhm.
And I still puzzle over that sometimes. Why would that be so joyful? We were so close to Belly and he was so close to us. And of course, we were very, very sad. But here was a situation that was full of joy.
You're reminding me, John, of the Thomas More poem that was our other song that we were supposed to look at. Did anybody read that?
Yeah, I did.
Listen,
Yeah.
listen to what
Yeah.
it says. Come ye disconsolate, wherever ye languish, earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot heal. Joy of the desolate, light of the strain, hope of the penitent, fadeless and pure. Here speaks the Comforter, tenderly saying, earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot cure. Here, see the bread of life, see waters flowing forth from the throne of God, pure from above. Come to the feast of love. Come ever knowing earth has no sorrow, but heaven can remove.
Yeah.
In some ways, that's the type of thing that we have to say, that, and you can't quite say, this will all go away. It'll all be better, because
No.
that's cheap grace.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can sit there and say, there's something more than just this story, can't you?
Mhm.
Or the story suddenly enlarges from the life of that boy.
Yeah.
We've realized all the further how joyful his life was.
That's right.
He was seriously disabled, but had been
Yeah.
so loving.
Yeah.
And it just seemed to,
Right.
be
And-
present or something. Yeah.
And with my sister and brother-in-law, in the midst of what was death head on, my brother-in-law's brother and sister, brother and wife. Okay, so Lane and Marsha are their names. They're the ones who took the kids with their 6 kids already.
Oh, boy.
Right?
Wow.
Forming this grand family of 11 children. But what was marvelous about it is that in many ways they kind of folded into each other like this. So many of the grieving children had someone their age that was there to be able to walk with them. And they formed this marvelous blended family that just took care of each other and supported each other and said, what you thought was all of what family was isn't true, that it's much different than that. And so even in the midst of the loss, they discovered something much grander and larger than what they could have imagined.
Yeah.
But it sometimes takes time to do that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we usually, no matter what the darkness is, I don't know about you, Judy, but because of my divorce, there are things I learned that I wouldn't have learned any other way.
Mhm.
And
yeah.
there's sometimes I wish I didn't have to have learned that, but there's other times that I'm so glad that I did go through that in order to learn that. And but that comes with time. And that's what I think hope calls us to, is that we can become something more in the midst of this. Hope, the third poem that they had us read was by Emily Dickinson. It says, hope is the thing with feathers.
Yeah.
That idea
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
being able to fly us beyond this moment, not just stay here in this time. So
Hope is the thing with feathers that perches on the soul and
Yeah.
sings the song without the words and never stops at all.
never stops at all.
Yeah.
And so what has, through the midst of your life, given you that type of feathery vision that allows you to go beyond anything? How have you, what are some of the things that help you to see beyond 2020, right? Because 2020 has tested all our souls in many different ways. What's the hope that you see?
Well, birds for one thing. Birds
we
and
have-
bees.
Yeah. I think it's marvelous how much more nature I see right now because you guys are staying home.
Yeah.
Right. And then they don't run into us as much. I've run into 2 big families of javelinas over the last 2 months.
Mm.
Right. That's a great thing to be able to have nature remind us of.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
What else gives you hope? And not just necessarily right now, but throughout your life, what's given you hope?
I think being kind and doing things, small things, for the pure joy of it. I would normally not share this, but I will, just by way of, I guess, demonstration and not for ego needs. I was at Costco yesterday. I must be one of the crazy people, but anyway, I was shopping and I didn't get toilet paper because they were already run out. But anyway, I still have some, thank goodness. But anyway, I got a few things, and there was a lady in with a vehicle, and her little daughter was helping her put things in the trunk, not trunk, but in the bed of the truck, and they were just interacting, and there was something so charming about the two of them, and I felt a connection of some sort, and so I think we exchanged pleasantries. And I thought, I just want to acknowledge this little girl because she's really earnestly helping. So the little girl was inside the truck already, and they were just finishing up. And I said, "Does she have a piggy bank?" And she said yes. And I whipped out a $1 bill. And so she had this little girl come, and I just wanted to acknowledge her. I got more joy out of giving that little girl a surprise in the $1 than spending tons of money or a big donation somewhere else. And I'm feeling very emotional this morning. I think your stories, the things that you are sharing from your own lives, is moving me greatly, which is fine. But I think I was reminded about just a little bit of kindness that we just can do spontaneously, that I can do, that brings me great joy.
Good. And if I can say it this way, Catherine, I think hope is a very emotional thing.
Yeah.
Because it hits us in those spaces that are very emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's literally the way we draw our path out of the challenging spaces and towards
Mm-hmm.
where we are living, right? And so it carries huge emotion with this.
Well, I think it's also, and I don't want to dominate things here, what I experience in this community is that I really like that everyone is so real, and opening their own hearts and experience. And I think we need to be able to do more of that. And we can see each other as friend or see the connection between and among us.
Yes, thank you. I was struck with that with John's story as well. I think sometimes in America we've gotten too good at hiding from death. And I love your story about the two other cousins, the brother that got in bed with. What a marvelous thing to do, to not be afraid of that death moment, but to love the person dying even more.
Yeah, those
Right?
were his sisters.
Sisters. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, but just that sense of caring enough about the individual to step towards rather than being fearful of, and the types of moments that we're talking about are always fear-invoking moments. Judy, talking about divorce with somebody or having somebody, you're going to say the wrong thing, right? Because the person is just in a space that's difficult and challenging. And but to choose to be present, even in the midst of not being able to speak or do perfectly, is absolutely incredible.
I'd like to also add that I think the Zoom classes have really added a level of intimacy, if you can believe that. We're not face to face, we're not able to touch each other, but we achieve a level of honesty and connection with each other that I think we've made a strong commitment to do for ourselves and for the community of whoever's gathered here. There's a lot of trust building and a lot of caring for each other.
Absolutely.
And I
Thank
think
you.
that that's real helpful.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love Zoom because not having a car, it's hard for me to get around, and being immunocompromised, it's hard for me to be around people even in normal times. And Zoom, I'm actually more in contact with people now than I was before
Yeah, yeah.
due to Zoom. And I'm having, on Tuesday nights, I have this class on mysticism with this church in Phoenix that I would have no access to. And it's like one of the most deep conversations about spirituality I've ever had with these people. And it's like, we were talking last night, they're going to try and find some way to keep connected virtually, even when this is all gone and stuff, because there's a couple of us from Tucson that are in that group. But it really does add a level of connection to my life that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Right.
For me, the opportunity to have small community, is what helps to provide hope, that when I'm not feeling hopeful or I'm feeling depressed or whatever is being difficult in my life, to have those that I can talk to about where I am, and just to be able to verbalize that, not just out to my dog, but to another human being who I know that I will get some kind of a support from. Having those folks in my life is just, I can't even describe how important that is.
Absolutely. And sometimes, Elizabeth, it's because that person also knew Teddy and has some of the same hurt as you.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's because they had whatever hurt in their life because of whatever thing happened through them to them. And that's important, huh?
Yeah.
In some ways, it brings us into some kind of kinship, even if it's not exactly the same experience. It
Right.
allows us to be there.
Mhm.
So we have one more poem to read, and I saved it till the end. It's called Prayer, and it's a marvelous poem. I've kept this bookmark forever. This is prayer on a bookmark. Someone gave it to me way back when, and I just love it because it's good to go back to regularly because of the content of it. And it says
I
this:
love it.
Father, Mother, God, thank you for your presence during the hard and mean days, for then we have you to lean upon. Thank you for your presence during the bright and sunny days, for then we can share that which we have with those who have less. And thank you for your presence during the holy days, for then we are able to celebrate you and our family and our friends. For those who have no voice, we ask you to speak. For those who feel unworthy, we ask you to pour your love out in waterfalls of tenderness. For those who live in pain, we ask you to bathe them in the river of your healing. For those who are lonely, we ask you to keep company. For those who are depressed, We ask you to shower upon them the light of hope.
Mm.
Dear Creator, you, the borderless sea of substance, we ask you to give to all the world that which we need most, hope and peace.
Ah,
I love that because of that series of prayers that just try to name that there's a lot of different things. And if I'm trying to give to someone who's lonely, what the person is who's hurt, it's a whole different, I might be giving the wrong thing, but just to continue to pray for wherever that person is at, how that person is struggling, what are the aches that they're dealing with. That's an important thing. And to be there in a prayerful space with each other in those moments is incredible, isn't it?
mhm.
Can we have copies of that, Jim? Is that on the list of things?
Yeah,
It is on
right.
the list. Yeah, it's called Prayer by Maya Angelou. There's two ways you can get it. You can just type that in and it'll print out on Facebook, but I mean on internet. But we also left a link on the
website.
web page, right, where the portals that we put there. That'll change at the end of the week because I'll put next week's readings onto there, but go there in the next couple of days and it'll still be there. Okay.
Thank you.
So in the midst of whatever is challenging for you right now, and there's hardly anything in this unincredible year.
Boring.
Just boring, nothing to do. Whatever it is, also look at those little lights of hope that have shown from your past and given you direction to now, and look towards what's giving you possibilities in the future, but also look really carefully at how you are doing that for other people. Look around you and see who it is that needs something from you, right? And sometimes it's things that you can fix. Like I'm sitting here in the office and there's a bunch of voices in the office, unlike usual. You know, Melissa's usually pretty quiet. But today we've got a bunch of people who are coming in and picking up Thanksgiving food bags because of the food you guys.
Oh, it's
donated,
Wednesday, yeah.
right? And so there's just more stuff going on. And I heard this thing that I think is marvelous. We have enough Vienna sausages to last for years. You know why we have a lot of Vienna sausages? I blame it all on one woman. Her name is Grace Rich. You know what Grace used to do? She would take Vienna sausages and she'd take them down to one of the parks downtown right along 22nd Street, and she would hand those out to people. Right? And so folks at St. Francis got really good at giving Vienna sausages. Right? What a marvelous thing to be able to say that in this can of cheap meat, I am going to give you some hope.
Yeah.
Right? And so some things we can take care of, other things we can just be with, right? I can't solve all the issues that somebody on the street has, but I can make sure that they know that in the midst of it, they're not alone.
You know, sending this prayer to a friend who is having a hard time is a really good way for me to support them.
Yes,
Give
absolutely.
them something to think about and to be with.
I think we're all going to do that because I know of at least one somebody that could use it as well. I suspect we
Yeah.
all do.
Yeah.
Well, that's because in the words of Maya Angelou's first poem, we all are on plagued journeys, right? They're not simple journeys we're on. And almost by definition, there are things that happen, logs that we stumble over, rocks that fall down from the hillside, whatever it happens to be. And in the midst of that, we get to choose to journey together and help each other. Thank you for choosing to be hope for each other. Thank you for receiving that hope from one another. Take care, my friends.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Jim. It was great.
Happy
Thank you.
Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.
Happy
Thanksgiving to
Thanksgiving,
you.
everyone.
Happy
Bye-bye now.
Thanksgiving. All of you.
Bye.
Mm.